Hi, everybody. Today is March the 16th, 2020. As you know, we've been in the grip of COVID-19. You cannot now avoid the news about it. It's wall to wall. I think it's safe to say that this is going to be something we'll all look back at in history. I mean, we're looking at the prospect now of things like Wimbledon being cancelled, the Grand Nationals already being called off, multiple sporting events in the USA, Grand Prix, possibly Euro 2020, the big soccer tournament that was happening with all the European football teams this summer. When you look back at sort of in history, one of the few times things like Wimbledon have been cancelled would have been in World War II. So it just shows you that this is unprecedented. And, what's more, when in anyone's lifetime, were there quarantines like this? You couldn't go out, bars, restaurants, everything closed, aircraft grounded. People not able to go to work. It's quite something. So this is going to be an astrology-rich broadcast where I actually look at some very interesting things I've discovered when I've looked back at pandemics in history. And for those of you who'll be joining me for the first time, to current events, and I do charts for politics for different countries. We also do some relationship astrology, looking at transits and how they affect people personally. But usually it's based around mundane astrology and current events. And I also do a lot of vlogs where I just chat about some of my opinions, some context, things that have come up in the news that relate to predictions I have made. So welcome to all my old subscribers, my new subscribers. And I know a lot of you like to see the charts and to hear the astrology, so this will really impress you. So I'm first going to look at a chart of the Bubonic Plague. Now, this chart was on the website of the classic astrologer. I'll leave a link so you can go to the website there and check it out for yourself. And I'll also upload some of these charts to my blog and leave a link so you can look at them in detail, because there are quite a few. I didn't have a chance to put them all up behind me. What I've done, because in astrology, you usually need a date, a time, and a place. But with viruses, you can't really nail it down to a specific time, date, time of day. So I'm using Aries ingress charts to look at these. They're very interesting. So what you do with the Aries ingress chart is you cast a chart for the exact moment the sun enters 0, degrees of Aries. So 0 degrees, 0 minutes of Aries. So it's the precise time the sun begins its cycle again, really, by entering Aries. And you can then do a chart for whatever place in the world based on that moment when Mars enters Aries. It's quite a good way to get a read on certain things that might be happening during the year in various locations. So what the classic astrologer did is he drew up a chart, and it's the Aries ingress chart for the it was during the Byzantine period for the epidemic AD 541, which they say started at the port of Pelusium near Suez in Egypt. Okay, there's not an exact date. So the chart is set for 0 degrees Aries at Suez, constituting a solar revolution. So here we go. That is the chart, just in case you want to get a snapshot of it, and we'll be chatting about that chart first. I think it's worthwhile saying, before we chat about that chart, that plagues are represented by several planets. So let's have a look. An epidemic is represented by Mars, Pluto, the 12th house, and Pisces. So we're looking for those elements when we're thinking about predicting for epidemics. Pneumonia is represented by Mercury and Gemini. So we'll be looking for connections to the 4th house with Gemini, because the 4th house is the manner of death, end of life. So if it's in Gemini, end of life is pneumonia. Flu is represented by Neptune and Uranus. I didn't find that much evidence of Uranus, lots of evidence of Neptune. Death itself is represented, as you can imagine, by the 8th house, Pluto, Scorpio, and also Mars conjunct Saturn, which we're going to be seeing in the chart for the UK. The 4th house, like manner of death, like I said. Saturn represents death by disease, so we'll also be looking for linkages, Saturn in the 4th house. Infection is Mars-Pluto, so conjunctions between Mars and Pluto, which we're also going to see in the Aries ingress chart, indicative of infection. Quarantine is Saturn. Saturn is rising in the UK chart, prominent in other charts. I'm also going to be looking at other countries, not just the UK. Virus itself is represented by planet Pluto. I also found something that I didn't expect to find was the prevalence of planets in Taurus. Now, obviously, if you do an ingress for Aries, you might get Mercury and Venus in Taurus because Mercury is rather tied to the sun, Venus as well, but less so. So it's not totally unlikely to have Venus and Mercury being in Taurus on an Aries ingress. However, I found that there were lots of other planets in Taurus, but particularly on either Algol, which is a very unfortunate fixed star, and Menka. Now, Menka, which is at 14 degrees of Taurus, but you can use a 2-degree orb, represents disease, disgrace, ruin, operators, and they're losing lung function. I think the representation of suffocation is very relevant. So we're going to find we're looking for 14 degrees of Taurus and round about there. We're also looking for round about 26 degrees of Taurus where Algol is, which is also the most unfortunate fixed star usually associated with violence and also with death. So in terms of the bubonic plague chart, very interesting. Saturn rising. Saturn represents death, disease, and also quarantine. Scorpio was rising. So Saturn was rising in Scorpio. I've already mentioned how Scorpio is related to death and disease. What else you get in this chart is Venus in Taurus. Back then, in the Byzantine period, Algol was actually there at 5 degrees of Taurus. So you've got the link. Venus conjunct Algol. Venus rules the descendant, of course. Take for the form of pneumatic septicemic, and the bubonic plague, obviously encompass those sort of symptoms. So the Byzantine chart, the one that I'm doing there that I discussed for the bubonic plague, very negative. It's got the main malefics, Saturn and Mars in Scorpio, conjunction the ascendant, and the ruler, or the ascendant there, ruler is Mars. They're taking Mars. Pluto wasn't discovered yet, so they're taking Mars as ruler of the Scorpio ascendant, is in the 8th house. The moon, which represents the public, also has connotations to health, is also in the 8th house. And Mars, which is the ruler of the ascendant, is not far off the south node either. So, sorry, I think I said there that Saturn and Mars was in Scorpio, but no, Saturn is in Scorpio, ruled by Mars, of course. So we have Mars, obviously, conjunct the south node. The malefics very strong in this chart. Hi, guys. Hi, Saeed. Do you think the virus has been created by humans? I'd say definitely the consensus seems to be this. I think it's highly unlikely, bearing in mind, all the symptoms and the knock-on effects. I think it's highly likely this was developed. It's what most people are saying now, isn't it? Hi, Lobi Dosa. Hello. You haven't missed too much, by the way. So Venus, again, as I said, in Taurus, but conjunct fixed star Algol. Algol was named by the Chinese as being piled up corpses. So, obviously that was the bubonic plague view. And Venus happens to rule the two most unfortunate houses, the 12th and the 6th. So Venus is heavily afflicted. Mercury is in its fall. Let's see, where was Mercury? Mercury is in Pisces. Obviously, Mercury rules Virgo, so Mercury is in its fall, and Mercury is also dispositing Mars and the Moon in the 8th, receives no benefit signs, and Mercury is also in Pisces. As you saw, Pisces is heavily associated with pandemics and disease and pneumonia as well. And the 4th house of death is in Aquarius, which is ruled by Saturn, and of course Saturn represents disease. Anything else important there? Right. Yes, the ascendant, of course, being in Scorpio, right, is considered to be it's not a very fortunate position, Scorpio being associated with massive social change, unrest, disease, all the kind of far-reaching ramifications and huge change that these diseases cause. What they also mention, they say the chart was very airy, sanguine, warm and wet, and classical astrologer ascribes this to being symbolic of the conditions for the plague to thrive, which was weather that was not too hot or cold or dry, just kind of warm and wet. So let's chat. I want to chat initially about London's chart for the Aries ingress of 2019. So this was March the 20th, 2019, was the Aries ingress. Now, we haven't passed the date of March 20, we will soon, but the disease began in December, so it's still relevant to look at this chart. Now, what I immediately noticed when I drew up this chart, that the sun was conjunct Chiron in Aries, obviously. Now, all of you will know who follow astrology regularly that Chiron has a very important association to health. It's the wound that never heals. And it's very symbolic in many different ways. And Chiron is a asteroid that lies between Saturn and Uranus. So it takes on a few properties of each of those. Chiron is the healer, but the person who could never heal himself. So it represents physical ailments, physical disabilities, and also internal ailments, disabilities, and healing. So it's got a very big association with health. So what I thought would be interesting was to look back at the time of the Spanish flu and see if Chiron was active. And indeed, Sun was conjunct Chiron when the Spanish flu broke out. Have a look, get you the map for that one. So the Spanish flu, I've done an Aries ingress for 1917. It was on the 21st of March, and I've placed it at Étaples in France, where it was said to have broken out. And there you find in the chart for the Aries ingress before the Spanish flu, you find Sun conjunct Chiron. The interesting thing was with the Spanish flu is that Chiron was at the end of continuation, the disease continued, and the following year, the Sun was again conjunct Chiron, but Chiron had moved further into Aries. So first of all, Chiron is in Pisces for the first year, 2017, 2018, it's direct conjunct Sun going into it was 19, I'm saying 19, so 1917, Chiron is end of Pisces conjunct Sun. 1918, it's exactly conjunct Sun. 1990, it's separating from the Sun. But important, and I think that's why the Spanish flu, let's quieten that down, I think that's why the Spanish flu lasted for 3 years, it lingered. However, when you look at the chart for the current flu, you find that we have almost an exact conjunction. Chiron is 1 degree of Aries, Sun is 0 degrees. So I think this one will go on a maximum of 2 years. So it may linger for the whole of 2020 and a little bit into 2021, but I think they'll get a grip of it after that because Chiron was a little bit further on than it was with the chart for the Spanish flu. What I looked then is to see when else was there an Aries ingress where Sun was conjunct Chiron. And I immediately find that in 1968, and I've done the chart here for the Aries ingress for Washington for 1968, the date is 20 March 1968, it was a time when Sun was again conjunct Chiron. This time, Chiron was at 29 degrees of Pisces. And what happened? If you look at the CDC website, you will find that in 1968, there was a pandemic. It was the H3N2, pandemic influenza, avian flu, and influenza mixed. It started in September 1968. It emerged in the USA, which is why I've done the chart for Washington. There were 1 million deaths worldwide, mostly people over 65, and 100,000 deaths in the UK. So if you take this as being roughly similar, the 1968 case, then we're possibly looking at, bearing in mind population increases, over 200,000 dead in the UK, in the US, over 2 million deaths worldwide. But bearing in mind people travel far more extensively now, and I know they're shutting down everything, but travel has been happening and it's been spreading like crazy. So that was the first thing. I'm just going to go back to the chart for the UK for this year so we can go through it and compare to the others. But that was the first big thing I noticed was Sun conjunct Chiron at the Aries ingress seems to mean some kind of significant maximum this year to run through it, and then it possibly will fizzle. So let me show you the chart here, just so you can get an idea of it. Again, similar to the Bubonic Plague chart, the London 2019 has Scorpio rising, and Mars, which rules Scorpio, is in Taurus, and it's at 23 degrees, so very near Algol. We talked about that significance of that kind of degree in Taurus being a very negative association. Mars, the chart ruler, is square to Venus, which rules the 12th house, also connected with pandemics. We said we're looking for 12th house connections. Again, associated with death, viruses, disease, and pandemics. So we're looking for a strong Pluto. So Pluto is also the chart ruler, as it's Scorpio. It's got two rulers, Mars and Pluto. So to have the chart ruler so negatively placed on the south node is another something that foretells of kind of doom and gloom. Mars, also seen as the chart ruler, rules the sixth house of health. Also, planets are kind of disabled in a way when they rule the unlucky sixth house, and sixth house, of course, being the house of health, ruled by Mars, fever. You'll see that Gemini is on the cusp of the eighth house. I said Gemini is associated with the manner of death, which is pneumonia, eighth house, the house of death, so death from pneumonia. We're looking for Neptune. Mercury, which rules the house of death, is conjunct Neptune. Neptune, of course, being associated with pneumonia. And the planet Mars also rules the sun in this chart because it's an Aries ingress. So you can see everything about this chart is saying, you know, Pluto, Mars, all the malefics. Only thing that wasn't represented here terribly much was Saturn, but Saturn is conjunct Pluto in this chart. Pluto, chart ruler, conjunct Saturn, and we know Saturn is connected strongly with quarantine. So the first house represents new starts, our freedoms, you know, our body. And so I think Saturn being linked so strongly to the first house definitely is indication of quarantine. Right, I think we've gone there. So remember again, epidemic is related to Mars, Pluto, the 12th, and Neptune. This is what we're looking for. Pneumonia is related to Mercury and Gemini. Influenza to Neptune, death to the 8th, Pluto, Scorpio. Also Saturn conjunct Mars. Saturn is death by disease. The 4th house is manner of death. Infection rates, Mars conjunct Pluto, which you're going to see in the current chart for the UK, comes to the fore. Quarantine is Saturn, and we're looking for also for Menka, that really awful fixed star. I think we'll look now at the chart for the Spanish flu. And as I said, I did an Aries ingress for 1917. It was 27th of March, 1917. That's when it kind of started in Etaples in France, and it lasted through 3 years. So here's the chart, so you can have a look. Okay, I'll put these up on my vlog so you can look at it in more detail. So again, Sun is conjunct Chiron in the first house. What was interesting to me that you didn't see in the UK chart, strong first house influence. First house being health, body. It also represents kind of new start. So it's the way we're projecting. So obviously the virus affects everything about our lives. And the first house is pretty much everything about us, our immediate perceptions. And our immediate perceptions are now like total lockdown, aren't they? So you will see in some of the other charts we look at the strong first house emphasis, first house also related to health very strongly. So in our Spanish flu, we go to the 6th house of health, and what do we find there? Saturn and also Neptune. We're looking for Saturn, disease, Neptune, pneumonia. Saturn also happens to be on the south node in the 6th house, as we said, when Saturn rules this chart because it's Aquarius rising. So again, like we saw with the UK chart now, you've got the chart ruler conjunct the south node. And here, once again, using traditional astrology, we've got Aquarius chart ruler, Saturn in the 6th house of health, and highly disabled being conjunct the south node. It's a very bad position, unlucky position, the south node. So we have the planet Venus ruling the 8th house. Venus, the 8th house of death, is in Pisces, which represents influenza, pandemics as well, and it's conjunct Mars, which is all about fever. Mars also strongly linked to pandemics, as I keep saying. Mars in Pisces, I think that's a good analogy. Mars, the fever, the pandemic, Pisces, influenza, also widespread disease. Now, Jupiter actually rules the midheaven, but Jupiter is in Taurus and it's square Neptune. So again, we have a look here at Taurus. We haven't got any placements here near Algol or Menka in this particular chart, but we do have another Taurus placement, Jupiter being a significant planet as it's the chart ruler. So as you see, again, a lot of those themes playing out. I'd like to mention here the 4th house is in Gemini, and I said we should look out for 4th house links to Gemini. 4th house, end of life, Gemini, pneumonia. Sorry guys, I haven't had a chance to read your comments. I'm just trying to concentrate on these. So again, I've done the Aries ingress for 2019 for Hubei, where it all broke out, or Wuhan, should I say. Wuhan in Hubei. Obviously, it's the same year, 2019. So we've still got the Sun conjunct Chiron. You'll see that the rising is in Pisces. And again, you'll see there, very strong first house influence. Planets conjunct the first house. Look at that, Neptune rising in Pisces in the first house. The Sun conjunct Chiron in the first house. Very strong first house placements and strong first house placements regarding health in that first house. Also interesting, Neptune is arising because there's a huge mystery. Neptune is all about secrets, mystery, and we all know that this thing was kept secret initially in China. They kind of tried to suppress it. They had to come clean eventually. Still a great deal of mystery regarding how this leaked out. I mean, with an ascendant Neptune in Pisces, Neptune Pisces is very much about either pharmaceuticals, biological kind of research. So, 12th house is the house of research, Neptune in there, secret research. I mean, you could read that into the chart if you wanted to. But there you've got the strong Neptune representing pandemic, and also the way it got out of control, the way it was kept very secret. Mercury is conjunct Neptune. I think that goes a long way to talk about the disinformation, maybe suppression of information. I know people who are big fans of China don't like me saying that. And I'll add that I think a lot of other governments are just as bad, right? So I'm not really, I think no government is really crowning themselves in glory over this. I'm not just criticizing China. All right, so we have obviously Neptune in Pisces, strong on the ascendant for this pandemic, strong first house. Here we have Jupiter is on the midheaven. That seems like quite a lucky thing. Maybe that represents that they have kind of had fortune in getting it under control, but it could also represent that during 2019 as a whole, before the virus broke out, Wuhan was on the world stage. They had these war games going on there where America and China were doing military things, and there was a lot going on in Wuhan this year. So it was a place that was coming on the map. And maybe Jupiter in Sagittarius represents that it's achieved some sort of global notoriety, whereas I think very few people had heard of it in the West. So maybe the Jupiter in Sagittarius represents that. Okay, we also have Venus once again rules the 8th house of death, and Venus finds itself in Aquarius, obviously ruled by Saturn. Saturn is manner of death. Venus in the house of death, ruled by Saturn. Manner of death is disease primarily. Venus is square to Mars, which is in Taurus. So there you've got Venus square Mars, the fever. And this time you find Mars on Algol on 23 degrees of Taurus. Just curious to look at something here in March. Where do we have we did our UK chart here. Where did we have Taurus? Oh, yes, there you go. There you go, guys. I think I said there were no in London. On the London chart, I don't know if I mentioned that Mars was a 23 degrees conjunct Algol, and obviously that's the same for Hubei because it's the same year. So here you have a significant planet, Mars, being conjunct in Taurus, again, conjunct this look really nasty fixed star Algol, which I said we were going to look out for. Pluto again on the south node, of course. Sun is opposite the moon. The moon is kind of symbolic of health, and it's in the sign of Virgo for the Chinese chart. As I say, Virgo is related to health. And we have a kind of square between the moon, Neptune, and Jupiter. Now, because the rising is in a water sign, and it's in a mutable sign, or should I say a cadent sign, this does kind of indicate that it may have subsided and it wasn't persistent in Wuhan. It's worse if it's in a fixed sign, right? So when it's in a fixed sign, it means it's going to persist, the disease or the outcome. It's represented by the ingress. But being in a cadent sign could suggest that they really have got it under control in China. It's quite interesting. Okay. I'd like to have a look now at the chart for Washington. I talked about it before. It's the 1968 pandemic, which you can look up on the CDC website. It's the Aries ingress for 1968. So once again, we have Taurus rising. It's 19 degrees of Taurus, so it's sort of out of the zone of Menka and Algol, although that's not it's not as exact as it could be, this chart. I think the ascendant could have been a little bit earlier, in which case it would have been closer to 16 Taurus and in the range of Menka again, that detrimental planet. Of course, as I've said, the reason I went back looking at 1968 was because the sun was conjunct Chiron, which it is in this chart. You don't see as much of the first house emphasis here, but there is a 12th house emphasis because the North Node is in the 12th house, along with Mars and Saturn, the two planets we're looking for when we look at death and disease. So the chart ruler, Venus, is in Pisces. Of course, we're looking for Pisces connections because Pisces is linked with pandemics. Jupiter's ruling the 8th house of death. It's square Neptune, which is in Scorpio. So that's a good theme because Neptune pandemic. Scorpio is also connected with pandemic. So you've got your 8th house linked to those two. Jupiter, the ruler of the 8th house, is opposite to Mercury. Mercury, of course, is connected to diseases, to pneumonias and influenzas. And Mercury is in Pisces, conjunct the chart ruler Venus. So there you go. There you've got your Mercury in Pisces and the influenza again. The North Node is kind of just between Mars and Saturn. So it's forming Mars and Saturn aren't in conjunction, but the North Node is in conjunction with it in the 12th house, also kind of associated with death and end of life. So there you have your 12th house associations with Mars fever, Saturn disease, death, etc. The sun, which is on the cusp of the 12th house, is of course conjunct to Chiron. Moon is in the 8th house of death. And your chart ruler, Venus, also rules the 6th house, the unlucky 6th house, which gives the whole kind of chart a rather kind of, unlucky feel about it. And so I think that was all I wanted to say about that particular chart. There you go. Just have another look at it. There's Washington. Let's have a look at the year going ahead. Okay, so on the 20th of March this year, in 4 days' time, we'll have our Aries ingress. They're in London for 2020. I think it's always important to look at the Aries ingress for London because we slap bang on the center. We're on the date line in London. We are on GMT. So London could be seen as a representative for the whole world rather than just London, just because we are in the center of the time zone kind of thing. So immediately note what we're looking for. It's got everything, this chart. Look at it. Look at all the first house planets. They're masses of first house planets. I said to look out for Pluto, as we saw with the Bubonic Plague and the Scorpio ascendant in the ingress chart for London last year. We're looking for a planet like Pluto, which represents death, disease, viruses. And there you go. You have Pluto on the ascendant in Capricorn. Capricorn ruled by Saturn. So Saturn rules the ascendant. Saturn, of course, as we know, is so key to all those elements that we're looking for. We've got a Mars-Pluto conjunction, which I think we said, let's see where that page was. The Mars-Pluto conjunction is very synonymous with infection rates. Because it's conjunct Jupiter, we can see the fast infection, the quick spread. There you go, just to show you once again how it's all Mars. So we've got there amazingly on this ascendant, Mars, conjunct Jupiter, conjunct Pluto, conjunct Saturn, all on the ascendant. This is why it's a momentous year. I mean, you've got all these huge influential planets, really forceful planets congregating there on the ascendant. Plus, we've got the moon in the first house in Aquarius, ruled by Saturn, the chart ruler. We've also got Mercury, and there we also have Neptune in the first house. So here we're ticking all our boxes. Plus, Sun, Chiron in Aries in the second. That Chiron in the second, that could be the wound that never heals financially as well, because of the financial knock-on and everything. So the ruler of the 8th house of death is in Pisces. We're often looking for that to see if there's a connection between the 8th house and Pisces, representing influenza and that. Okay, as I say again, Mars, conjunct Pluto, conjunct Saturn, conjunct Jupiter, all this connected with death, disease, infection, viruses, also quarantine. Saturn in the first house, ruling the first house, is all about quarantine. So there you go. There's your lockdown coming. The moon, which is in the first house, is unlucky because it rules the 6th house, because Cancer is ruling the 6th house. Let's have a look and see. There we go. Venus is on 15 degrees of Taurus, right on Menka. And remember what we said about this Menka. Menka is disease, disgrace, ruin, ill fortune, illness, worries, survival of the fittest, diseases of the throat, inflammation, and suffocation. Ruin is important because, I mean, unfortunately, and everyone's really worried about this, it's the financial ruin. It's just the knock-on. People who are still saying it's a flu, more people dying of flu, are not comprehending the knock-on domino effects of having the airlines grounded, trains not running, businesses not able to make a profit, so many people being laid off work in hospitality, airlines, virtually every business. We've even got car manufacturers closing down. The housing market's not going to move. Even things like the bookies. You can't place a bet because there are no sports matches on. Just think everything. TV shows can't film. There's nothing that's not affected. And it's not just that, oh, well, there's some people in hospital. So much of the ICU is taken over by the corona patients. You've got other operations having to be put off, blood banks running low of blood because no one's donating blood. Your people who might have heart attacks, strokes, be in car accidents, how are they going to be dealt with? So it's not just a case of, oh, whether you get the disease or whether you die from the disease. You better not get anything else either because the services are so stretched. How many doctors have come down with this as well? I mean, I must admit, at the beginning, I was prepared to say it might fizzle and it might just be like SARS and everything that went away, but it's becoming more and more clear. This is the big one. It's not going away in 2020. It will linger till at least 2021. Okay, and also, sorry, guys, to have to tell you this, but there you go, Mars conjunct Jupiter in 22 degrees. And as one of my listeners recommended me to do some research on the 22 degrees is kill or be killed. It's a negative degree, especially in Capricorn. And there we have that 22 degrees. Jupiter, which is the lucky planet, is unfortunately in its detriment because it is in, where is it now? It's in Capricorn, yeah. So Jupiter's exalted in Cancer, so it's in its detriment. So it's weak and not very helpful when it's in Capricorn. Mars, of course, is in the 12th house. I think Mars in the 12th house says a lot to us about it being asymptomatic and spreading so quickly where people don't even know they got symptoms. That's the danger of it. It's stealthy. It's a cunning little disease, isn't it? Horrible, horrible thing. Pluto also rules the midheaven. So Pluto on the ascendant rules the midheaven, the kind of direction of travel. It's really negative stuff. Unfortunately, looking at this, I see not only the disease a problem, but an increase in crime due to it, looting and a lot of problems. It's not really a pretty picture. I think we'll put that away, actually, not a pretty picture. We did London, March. Okay, guys, what I finally wanted to end off, because we've talked at pandemic charts, I thought pandemic is linked with death. So I was going to look at two charts of a time in history where there were a lot of sudden death that you wouldn't have expected. One is New York, 9/11, 3,000 more people died. And also St. Petersburg during the siege of St. Petersburg. And I've done Aries ingress charts for those just to see how they compare in terms of, obviously not so much disease, but the death, right? Okay, guys, you're going to be amazed at this. Not amazed in a good way, but amazed about astrology. But New York, 9/11, the Aries ingress chart, you have Saturn, which is exactly on Algol, 26 degrees of Taurus, sitting on the ascendant, which is 27 degrees of Taurus. So any astrologer who looked at the Aries ingress chart of New York for 2001 should have known something really awful was going to happen. What was that Algol there? I mean, it's awful. In this case, we've got a slightly different thing. We've got a 10th house influence with Neptune conjunct Moon on the 10th. I think that definitely speaks to how it affects the whole direction of travel for America, and maybe in a negative way, what with all the wars in Iraq and everything, and also a bit of a void of leadership. Maybe it reflects the fact that as time gone on, no one really trusted the real version of events, or certainly everyone has questions, whether it was cock-up or conspiracy. Neptune being on the midheaven kind of shows us that there would always be conspiracies, a bit like JFK. There'd always be conspiracies. No one would ever really be satisfied. We'd never get the truth on it. Okay, another thing, Mars is conjunct Pluto in the 7th. The 7th is the house of enemies. Obviously, Mars conjunct Pluto is associated with violence, violent attack. And because it's in Sagittarius, it's ideologically based. Obviously, religious. If you kind of are going to say that these were all terrorists from Saudi Arabia or whatever, it is ideologically based. But even if you say it was the deep state, that's kind of also ideologically based, isn't it? Jupiter was ruling the 8th house of death, and it was in the 1st house in Gemini in its detriment. I think we saw that when we looked at the UK chart, that Jupiter ruling the house of death in the 1st house in its detriment is not a good thing. Or I think in the UK it was in its 12th house, but it was very near the descendant in its detriment. So when Jupiter rules the 8th and it's in the detriment, not so good. In fact, I don't think Jupiter was ruling the 8th in the UK chart. It was in one of them anyway, but we can look back at that and see. Venus, which rules the unlucky 6 houses, in the 12th. And here, slightly different to the pandemics, we had Saturn square Uranus. So Uranus in Aquarius is more prominent here because it's more of a kind of political story rather than a pandemic story. In St. Petersburg, we also get some really stunning results in terms of astrology, unpleasant ones really. We have Sagittarius ruling the chart. I'll just show it to you. Okay, so here we've got Sun on the South Node, right? Not good. And the Sun rules the 8th house of death. Sun is conjunct Venus. Venus rules war. And here, once again, we have the IC conjunct Saturn, conjunct Jupiter on Menka. So once again, we've got that powerful Taurus placement between sort of 12 and 16 degrees of Taurus, representing something really, really unpleasant. In the St. Petersburg chart, Mars representing war in the 1st house. The moon is in detriment in the 1st house in Capricorn. Mars is also in Capricorn in the 1st house, Capricorn being synonymous with death and strife. Pluto's ruling the midheaven. It's placed in the 7th of the enemy. Pluto being kind of the midheaven being the direction of travel. As I said before, Jupiter, which is the chart ruler in this case, very important, is on Menka, the 15 degrees of Taurus, and it's on Saturn in Taurus as well. And of course, the Taurian placement make it such a sustained kind of attack. Then I mentioned Sun being conjunct the South Node. Well, Neptune was conjunct the North Node. That indicates a great deal of loss, personal loss, grief, sadness. The 4th house, end of life, obviously on Menka. So I'm going to put all those up. I've got my notes next to it, which I can leave there in case you want to look at them. So all I can say is, from looking at, I hope you've enjoyed the analysis. I'm free from my kind of political comment today, but I hope you've enjoyed the analysis of the charts, the certain placements. So just to recap, strong 1st house placements, the reoccurrence of Sun conjunct Chiron, and this reoccurrence of placements at around the 14 degrees of Taurus with Menka, or the 26 degree of Taurus with Algol, often linked to chart rulers. We find our chart rulers poorly placed. We find Saturn extremely prominent in the chart, Pluto prominent, Mars prominent, 12th house prominent, 8th house linked to Neptune and Gemini, representing the pneumonia and the lungs, 4th house of also end of life, connected to Saturn or Gemini for disease and pneumonia. Therefore, I think this is going to be significant. I think everyone should take a great deal of precautions. You should trust your own instincts. You should not worry if your friends are poo-pooing it and saying, just carry on, be calm and carry on. Be calm by all means, but be prepared. Don't panic buy, but certainly be stocked up. Definitely do some scenario building for yourselves about what could possibly happen and think ahead. Please stay safe and well. Please take vitamins, get loads of sleep, do your good routines, get a small bit of exercise and sunlight if you can. Do your social distancing. There's no harm in it at all. And if you feel like wearing a mask, but get a sensible mask. I mean, some masks, it's true, are rubbish. I suggest going to the paint aisle of your DIY store, and because paint's very fine particles. So if you go to the DIY store and maybe get one of those ones for paint, they might still have stock because not everyone has thought about that. Those actually might be better. And then I would just put some tissues inside that you can maybe quickly replace if they get like soggy. And then you don't have that problem because it mustn't get wet if you need to go out. But just be careful, guys, touching surfaces. And remember, you touch things and then you touch your phone, you touch your hair, you touch your handbag. So be conscious of the fact that even if you've washed your hands, you still got to go back and touch the things you touched before, like the phone, the handbag, maybe your shoe, your hair, your jewelry. Maybe you're one of those people who play with jewelry. So just be careful. Don't touch a lot of stuff. And don't want to sound all momsy, but anyway, hi guys. Guys, there'll be so many comments, but I just had to kind of focus. Jonathan, yes, Justin King was saying supply chain problems. I think there could be shortages. From the chart, I can't really say. I think there should be shortages. Guys, just to say one thing that's very, very different to the Spanish flu is back then, people, basically, they were exhausted and very depleted after the World War One. So that's a bit different because we've kind of been okay up till now, haven't we? But people were more self-sufficient. They lived in small communities. A lot of people had farms or lived near a farm. People still, maybe kept chickens or had some access to their own water supply or weren't so reliant on electricity. We are so domesticated now. We are totally reliant on our local supermarket, the electricity and water supply staying on. That's why we're more vulnerable in that way. So although we're generally healthier and have access to better hygiene than they did in the Spanish flu, we're just totally not self-reliant. I mean, unless we do live in countries where we live in the farm. Most of us live in cities, and if the supermarkets run out, we're in trouble. So be creative with your shopping, shop around, think of things like quinoa or millet, things that other than rice that people might not necessarily buy. Stock up on your frozen foods and stuff as well. As I do think food shortages are coming. If so many people are going to be off work and staying at home, you can't be sure. I know in America they're closing lots of restaurants, but they're still doing takeaway. I advise everyone not to do takeaway. If anyone rings 911, the first thing they ask you if you feel unwell, usually with like more of a gastroenteritis thing, they say, have you had takeaway? They say the biggest amount of problems they get calls for is people who've had takeaway, so don't have takeaway. I don't want to make you all neurotic, but I mean, look, you don't need takeaway, do you? You can do without it. Get your freeze bread, beans on toast. Hey, it's what would you say? It's wartime rules. Yeah. And what's the good news? The good news is it'll die out and it'll be over, somewhat like the Spanish flu. A herd immunity will develop, and I think this thing will die out. I would encourage people try not to get it, rather, but you don't want to take the chance, because news coming out of Holland and France is that a lot of people under 40 are also on the respirators. Okay, so don't just think, well, I'm young, I'm perfectly healthy, because it's not necessarily work like that. Obviously, you should be more reassured if you're younger, but still, and look after your folks. Don't visit your folks if you're sick and anything like that. Just keep away. I mean, that's obvious. Hey, yes, I'm doing vitamin C powder, but with vitamin C, it's dose. Don't take it all at once, because your body gets rid of vitamin C within 5 to 7 hours. So rather take little amounts more often. Apparently, vitamin C is helpful in the initial phases, but if you do get it, you want loads of D3, because that'll help you afterwards. Take zinc now, but once you've got it, it's no use taking zinc. Coenzyme Q10 is fantastic for stopping. I mean, Ian Collins chatted about it on his LBC show, and he's not open. He's not on LBC anymore, but he's not really open to vitamins. And the amount of calls he had recommending this Coenzyme Q10, I'd never heard of it, but I went on Amazon and the reviews were amazing. So I'd say definitely people who took it said they were no longer getting colds or flus. So definitely take that. I would say keep off the alcohol. Some people say alcohol kills it. I don't know. Remember, gargling with your salt and bicarb, teaspoon of bicarb in boiling water with a sprinkle, 4 pinches of salt. Let it cool to lukewarm and gargle with that if you feel you've been exposed to someone with the virus, because it helps kill the germs in your throat. And if you can actually sniff it up as well. I recommended it to one of our subscribers, and he said it was a really gross experience, but it actually nailed his cold on the head. So that helps a lot. You can also rub bicarb into your hands with an essential oil. That helps. Just use some bio oil, even some olive oil if you're desperate, and rub bicarbonate into your hands like this if you can't. I mean, obviously soap and water is best, but hey, if you're really desperate, the bicarb on the hand's is not a bad thing. So Hi, Debbie. Yes, I know, Debbie. I want to do more astrology. It says sometimes I'm so busy with other things that it's quick for me to do some other little updates. And, I'm a bit addicted to talking about either Brexit politics or this. So I'm going to leave this now. And it's not a hoax. I'd say no, it's not a hoax. It's real, and people are getting sick. So don't treat it as a hoax. Look, there may be conspiracies attached to it, but that doesn't mean you don't have to worry about getting it. Okay, so I'm not against conspiracies about this plan, that plan, blah, blah, blah. Hey, guys, remember I said the other day this mightn't be an ideal time for them to implement universal income? Well, Mitt Romney was tweeting that this is an ideal time to pay every American £1,000 to help them. I don't know if he means a month, but that would basically be bringing in universal income, which is on Agenda 21. So as I said in my previous podcast, I did a vlog called what do you call it, a podcast called Multiple Agendas Served, looking at how this really does serve the globalist agenda in many ways, apart from the fact about borders becoming very popular again, showing us that, you know, those sort of fail-safes are necessary and that borders aren't old-fashioned and aren't racist. They're essential firewalls to protect citizens from this kind of eventuality, right? The Great Reset is happening. I mean, financially, I'm going to have to talk more in others about financial stuff. Guys, just a little note. I'm going to try and do another one tonight about something which is really going to shock you. This is not my analysis. This is something I picked up online, but I definitely want to talk about it. It's some crazy stats that I found on a military website, and I want to talk to you about them. I've had this prepared, actually, since November last year, but I never got to talk to you about it. I think this is the time. I hope to come back on here later and maybe do it. But I'm just going to end the stream now. Have a drink before my voice is totally gone. God bless. Stay safe. Say your prayers as well. You don't have to be massively religious to say your prayers for all your friends and family, not only for the virus, but to help them financially through it, because it's a very stressful situation, the unknown in terms of the economy and jobs. Okay, guys, take care.